So how did that shift the budget?
Well, the interesting thing is that what it did for budgeting purposes is it changed the budget focus from how much money we have to spend and how much more we'd like to have to spend this year to what are our educational objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And then how much is that going to cost us? And so they would actually build a budget process, and they still do it to this day, coming out of their educational objectives. This is what we want to achieve this year. This is the resources we think that we need to achieve that. Here are the costs. Here's what the total cost would be. And at that point, they then make the hard choices. Do we have enough money to cover those services or not? And if they don't, then they ask a question that almost no one else asks, which is, what are our priorities? And here comes the big one. What are we not going to do in order to achieve them?
How has that affected all the stakeholders, teachers, pupils, principals, the general public?
Well, this is the other factor that comes into play, is that all of these changes, of course, had impacts throughout the system. They had impacts for schools, for parents, for the employers, for the union, for the community. So what you saw was that schools were actually expected to educate their kids, but in exchange, they were allowed to run their schools. You run your school. All we ask is that you achieve the educational objectives that we set out. And by the way, we're going to measure and report on those things, and we're going to hold you to account. Parents suddenly were considered equal partners in the process. It wasn't just words, it was deeds. They were given the power and the information they needed to actually participate in their children's education in a meaningful way. The union is an amazing example of positive engagement in this exercise. The union hasn't stopped being a union. They haven't stopped representing the interests of their teachers. They push for better working conditions, better pay, more flexibility, all the things that you'd expect a union to push for. But they do so in the context that the site-based management empowers our teachers and improves their workplace environment.
It doesn't sound as though this was easy. Were there barriers that were placed in the way?
With a fundamental change like that was undertaken in Edmonton, of course there are going to be barriers. There are groups that are going to be uncomfortable, and there are questions going to be responded to, that have to be responded to. So some of the groups that, of course, were not necessarily fully on board at the start, you take a look at your elected board, you take a look at your senior staff, you take a look at the faculties of education, the people who are actually training your teachers. All of a sudden you're expecting your teachers to have different skill sets because they're going to be expected to have a lot of independence in their classroom, which wasn't necessarily the case before. So that changes the way you have to train your teachers. It's going to necessitate a change in perspective of your union. It's going to necessitate a change in perspective of the entire community. All of those barriers require a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of conversation. The communications is key. Some of the other things that Edmonton did to overcome those types of barriers, and all of these things are absolutely critical in the change process. Leadership. Continuity of leadership was actually absolutely key. You had to have a small group of people committed to this change who understood what it meant and were able to communicate it effectively, and actually were able to take the place of the person ahead of them as they moved on in their careers, because of course no one's going to stay in the same job for 25 years, so you have to have someone coming after them. You have to have a Department of Education that is supportive, that sets up the legislation to allow you the place to work and to focus. The overall community environment has to be conducive, and that gets back to the point around where Edmonton is located, what the people there are like, what they expect from their education system. All of those things are key.
What were the factors in the success of the Edmonton model?
Now, in terms of some of the key success factors for the Edmonton model, not necessarily in terms of processes, but in terms of attitudes, I think that's important to discuss. One of the things, of course, is the Edmonton model changed over from a traditional central services model to a site-based, choice-based model without $1 more. Because, of course, Edmonton is in Alberta. Alberta is probably one of the most affluent provinces in the country of Canada. And, of course, other Canadian provinces look at Alberta and say, well, they're able to achieve all the success in education because they have more money. But the fact is that Edmonton made substantial changes without $1 more. In fact, they were very explicit when they launched their pilot project in the late 70s. You are not going to get any more money than your compatriots who are not in the pilot. And that was absolutely critical, because what that proved, beyond a reasonable doubt, what that proved was by changing how you do things, you can have an impact without worrying about how much you spend to do it.
So what have been the results?
Edmonton has a remarkable degree of accountability reporting and testing. So their English language performance has gone up in every every grade level. Their math performance has gone up in every grade level. The level of satisfaction of students, of parents, of teachers in the workplace has gone up across every jurisdiction. So when you talk about elementary, when you talk about middle schools, when you talk about high schools, all of these parents, all of these teachers, all of these administrators are happier now than they were when they changed. And in fact, if you ask them, would you go back to the old system, uniformly, even those who are critical of some of the things happening today, uniformly they would not return. Now, that doesn't mean that everything's perfect in Edmonton. They still readily admit that there are things that they need to solve. The retention factor, the ability to keep kids in schools continues to be a significant challenge for them. But the key difference between Edmonton and other districts is Edmonton is very open about that. We have a problem, here's our plan, here's our goals, and here's what we're going to do to make a difference. And that's a fundamental thing that people need to understand, is that you have to be open about your continued challenges, and you have to simply be clear about what your plan is to respond to them.
So what were the lessons learned out of Edmonton?
Well, if I was giving advice to public administrators or public managers about how to make these kind of effective changes, to give more authority and influence and ability to act to their local schools, there are certain things coming out of the Edmonton experience that are very clear lessons that have to be learned and applied. And the first lesson, of course, is that people can be trusted. You can give control of your school to your principal. You can give control of the classroom to the teacher. You can give decision-making authority to parents, and they will do a good job. They will work in the interests of the students. That doesn't necessarily mean that individuals won't make mistakes, that dumb things won't happen, that principals won't hire, their cousin to paint the front door of the school. But the key thing, of course, is that you can't change public policy based on those outliers. You have to recognize that overall the system is working, the objectives are being achieved, and not be taken aback when things occasionally go astray. The other couple of exercises is, of course, that continuity is key. You have to have continuity in leadership. You have to have a group of people who are committed to this, who understand what you're trying to achieve, and most importantly, are able to communicate this. You have to be able to carry those people forward. So one replaces the next, and then they recruit a body to come in behind them. In addition to, of course, the leadership, you have to have it as a community effort. While it's absolutely critical to have those 5 or 6 people who are going to lead this, who are going to maintain that momentum, they have to engage the rest of the community. They have to make it meaningful to bus drivers. They have to make it meaningful to janitors. They have to make it meaningful to classroom teachers. They have to make it meaningful for parents. And the way they do that is they answer the question, what's in it for me? Because you can't just ask people to do more work. You have to tell them what they're getting in return. Incentives matter. And if you make this meaningful to people, if you improve their job environment with these changes, they will return you in kind. In fact, they will return you exponentially the value to your kids. So you have to answer that question, what's in it for me? The other most important piece is the old adage, actions speak louder than words. There are districts across North America that call themselves site-based managed, that call themselves data-driven. There are districts and schools across the globe who say they are focused on students, focused on supporting the teachers, are engaging their parents in the education activities. And none of those things are true. And the simple fact is, people know when you're lying to them. If your actions are not matching your words, then you're not going to be able to sustain the momentum going forward to get these changes working and secured in place. So if, as an example, Edmonton Public once said to their principals, if you can save resources on your lights, so if you turn the lights off and you save on your electricity bills, you'll keep the money. Edmonton principals and their communities did an amazing job. In one fiscal year, they saved $4 million. The school board wanted to take the $4 million back, of course. Why would we do that? And the answer the superintendent gave them is, you can take that money once, and then it will never be there again. And now what happens? In Edmonton, the schools that saved that $4 million got to keep it that year and every year thereafter. And they've been able to spend it on their kids. And that's how actions have to back up your words.
Thank you.